it's not only K-3, but also, kind of in junior high, you have to know how to explicitly and directly teach vocabulary, particularly words that have Greek and Latin roots, because that's the bulk of our vocabulary as we get to the more academic subjects, kind of math, science. In high school, the same thing. So we have to address both how we identify kids, we have to address pre-service and in-service professional development at all levels. So I just wanted to highlight, this issue of special ed. We should be focusing on the children whose parents we've heard testimony from, right? The kids who cost $230,000 a year, our average in that $244 million, it's like, that we spend on IEPs, is somewhere between $11,000 and $30,000. The more expensive kids, this is where we want to be focusing our efforts, right? These kids really need this intervention. The other kids, really, it could be taken care of K-3. And so that's why the focus on the K-3 reading is super important. Stand for questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Landon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Fleming, I just wanted to tip my hat and thank you for all the work that you did to help us on House Bill 297. It was some of the most satisfying work that I've really been involved with in my years, and many of the people sitting here helped out both on the House side and Senate side. The bill was dramatically changed from when it was first brought to Cheyenne, and thanks to the work of a lot of people, I think we arrived at a pretty decent framework. My question to you is, now that that framework is in place, can we, during the summers, for example, get our teachers up to speed? Is there a way, is that doable with what you've given to us this morning?
Chairman, Senator Landon, thank you for that question. The answer is yes. And the Department of Ed had contracted with my partner and I to help contribute to a large federal grant that we just submitted, which relates explicitly to teacher preparation to teach reading, focused on the most at-risk groups. The bill was K-12. Obviously, the most focus has to be the grant was K-12. The most focus has to be K-3. So we do have a plan. It takes time. So we do a training, for example, in the summer of 50 teachers. We then need to have people who come and follow up to make sure that it's being implemented with fidelity and embedded, and that they have the tools they need to be successful implementing it. So it's not kind of like a week, one-time shot. It is training, and then it is follow-up sessions with appropriate trainers. We have this. I'd be happy to share this grant with whoever would like to look at it to demonstrate how we could do this, frankly, statewide. But the answer is yes, we can do it.
Thank you. Other questions? Senator Hutchins. Turn your mic on.
Thank you. I too applaud you for your work last year. And as you know, reading is my passion. I think if a child doesn't know how to read by first, second, third grade, they're pretty much going to be a failure on all the rest of the subjects. Can you tell me, is this problem systemic in public schools? Is this happening in charter schools, home schools, private schools? Where are we in that range with the public schools?
Chairman, Senator Hutchings, thank you for your question. So the degree to which children cannot read and the degree to which teachers are not properly empowered, and again, I want to be clear, this is not a criticism of teachers. They are, they have not received a lot of this training. It's about the same.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Pieperinen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just kind of a side note, I was visiting with Dean Reitzel at the University of Wyoming, and he quoted the National Council of Teacher Quality, and that they do find the LED program at the university in the top 2% of the nation. And I believe they're also part of that group seeking the $10 million from the feds regarding that. So again, I applaud your work too, and teacher instruction on literacy is so important.
Chairman, Representative Pieperinen, so the National Center for Teacher Quality did acknowledge that the University of Wyoming does make mention of some of the components of the science of reading. So the notion that we must teach, for example, phonological awareness, the notion that we must teach phonics. However, what it does not do is teach teachers how to do that. So that is something which is still missing from our University of Wyoming curriculum. Though they, at this point, I guess what I would say is it's a pretty low bar. And the degree to which they were involved in this federal grant was that I requested that they write a letter of support for the grant, and that was their involvement. We need to see change at the University of Wyoming in the teacher prep program. And teachers, again, I'm not a Wyoming teacher. Teachers will tell you that as well, who are teachers of reading.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Other public testimony?
All right, good morning. Charles Oskey, Superintendent of Sheridan 3. I don't want to assume or make a statement that I'm not against computer science and everything that you guys are talking about, but I want to bring a reality to things because I think it's a great process. We talk about how it's being supported. But I want to remind you about the most amazing people that we're talking about here today, and those are the teachers. And just an assumption, yesterday we heard there's 1,100 standards. I go back and I tell my teachers who currently we're doing the literacy, K-6, that requires training. The math standards, the science standards, that all have to be revisited after your state assessment to make sure that our scores are going up in that accountability piece. So you've noticed all the standards that have to be taught and how they have to go through a process of aligning to what they feel is the most important standard. Then it comes back to instruction in the classroom. And we haven't talked about is it's still 8 to 4. There's a certain amount of time in the day that teachers have a time to teach, to instruct. And just with the literacy program itself, in most teachers' world, you're talking, it's just not as simple. We just heard that statement. Teachers need to be supported and trained on how to teach literacy correct, and most importantly, supported over time, not a one-time snapshot with what we're doing. So we're not including the time that it takes not only to instruct kids, but to train teachers. Now we're asking them, and I'm just telling you from my point of view as a superintendent, I'm going to support the reading, the math, and the science component that needs to be taught. But with literacy, those are 90 to 120-minute blocks where you instruct, you have different groups, you have the different areas that she just talked about, you bring them back, you look at the data, you do the walk to read, because if we want kids to read by 3rd grade, that takes support and that takes training. And to do more training at the universities, I think the universities are doing the best they can, but if we're going to start asking teachers to come out of there with a 5 or 6 year degree in order to be a teacher, okay, at the wages that we talk about, because it comes back around to, that's going to be even more difficult. So it's our responsibility as a district to provide that training, and not just a one-time training, it's a long-term training that goes along with what we do with the core areas. And then you throw in the basket of goods. You throw in your art, your music, your PE, your health, the computer science now. So I just want you to realize that sometimes when we go back, or I go back to my amazing little team and say, all right, and according to what were our scores for literacy, we need to improve them. Where are the areas that we need to refocus back on our curriculum and standards instruction? Where are our weaknesses in math? Where are our weaknesses in science? And how can I help you with your instruction in your classroom management? How can I bring that training in? And then I'm going to come to the point and say, now we have 1,100 standards that we have to prioritize, and then I need some of you to go get trained to do that. It can be overwhelming. So I just want you to realize we're on board, we're going to get there, but we're probably going to be the district that's a little bit behind that process, because the focus for us and my staff is going to be making sure they're supported with the literacy piece, the math piece, and what's happening in the classroom. So I appreciate all the support. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to speak that, but I want to remind you of the teachers' world where they're at, and sometimes when the trickle-down effect comes back to them in the classroom, sometimes it just takes time to make sure that we're on the same page. So that's all I wanted to state. Thank you for your time, and I thank you for all the great questions that I've heard everybody here ask today about the importance of education.
I just want to say one thing, we're very I think this committee is very understanding, and the legislature as a whole, of how we can impact the really small districts with things we're doing. And I think we're all very aware of that, and I really appreciate your comments.
And it's not just small school districts. I guess I want to speak for teachers in general, because there's another term out there that that's never come across. PLCs are huge. We talk about that. That takes training to incorporate a PLC within a school. That's just not something you hand a book to and have a discussion. It's about a training and it's a culture that you create. So thank you. Yeah, I do represent small school districts, but I also want to represent those teachers that are in the classrooms every day. So.
Senator Roberts.
So we have, I think we still have 10 days, if I'm not mistaken, of professional development built into statute in addition to the, I believe, 170 contract days of student contact. And we've talked a lot about professional development and maybe trying to find ways where it can be done better and supported by the state. Do you have any ideas for that? Because it sounds like a big part, obviously, of your district is that professional development and making sure it's targeted towards the needs of new standards and new educational requirements. But I still don't know that we're doing a coordinated effort as a state on it. I still feel like after all these years, it's every district is on their own trying to figure out what the right professional development is for them when we have a lot of resources and we could be working together. And we really haven't visited this, I think, in a couple of years. What are your thoughts on this point?
So from my point, train the trainer. We need to bring somebody back to our district that there's every day. I think the state does, and we have an opportunity there's trainings around the state. But when in our building, or I'm assuming it's others, if you try to get everybody to it, then you're bringing subs into the building, and where we have limited subs, our philosophy is to train a trainer that can be within the district or within our facility to make sure that you maintain that. And I'm just using literacy as an example. So in that piece, we have an individual that has been trained with the balanced literacy piece, the Fondas and Pinnell. They support the teachers, the young teachers through that. They meet with them once a week. They look at the data. They do the walk to reads. They move kids around. But sending those critical people out and making sure they're trained to support the teachers is our piece in that. Now, we try to, but with limited funds, I tried to bring the professional development to us so that I can bring it to everybody at once. Instead of doing, 2 teachers this time, 2 teachers next time, I find it to be much more collaborative. In our alternative schedule, because we're a 4-day week, we have 16 days of in-service. So that's supported throughout the year, once a month, a minimum of once a month, so we can do follow-ups. So it's not a spray and pray type of situation where you do it in August and then you don't revisit it until May, and sometimes that's too late. Teachers need that support. And more importantly, with literacy, they need that support probably weekly. So in implementing those things to make sure they're supported throughout the process. Because we come back fired up from any type of training. But when it comes back to the reality of getting back into the classroom and dealing with that, how is that supported and how is that implemented? Because the everyday grind of, our scores, the anxiety that comes along with that, how are our kids performing? Are they growing? And part of our philosophy here in my district is, are kids growing? I want to know where they start and where they end. The one-time snapshot in time is not necessarily a true story of where kids are growing, because that could be a bad week that, a kid has had. And in my district, 1 or 2 kids is the difference between us being 100% or below the state average. So in that process, it's some of that training. To answer your question, Senator Rothfuss, I believe it has to come to the district for our size so that everybody sees it. And, that's, again, finding the money to do that. And most of that sometimes is done through Title II funds. Even those get reduced. But you have to talk about teachers and culture, too. So is that fair?
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Flitner.
thank you. Charles, just give me the scenario of how a classroom educator will factor in this additional, 15 hours required to become a computer science instructor on top of what they're already doing in their lives.
So we do the same thing we do with prioritizing standards. We have to prioritize our lives and our professional piece. So from my point, as a superintendent, I have to respect that they have families, they have lives, and they need an opportunity to make sure that they're a whole person. Because if you have a teacher that feels good about themselves, feels supported, then they're going to impact kids in a positive way. So that balance is coming back to us together, prioritizing what's important. And I'll just be transparent. Right now, it's literacy and math, that instruction and that support over that piece. So we have to have those decisions together. And I've learned that lesson as a leader. It comes back to leadership. When you walk into a professional development meeting and your entire staff is in tears because they don't know how to balance their life and all the training that's required, we have to prioritize what's important. And for our district and for our staff right now, it's reading. So,
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Follow up.
So, but give me an actual, for instance, so if I'm a classroom educator, I'm in grade school, or no, I'm a high school educator, and so I'm gonna decide now that I'm gonna be your computer science specialist with, at your district. I'm also teaching full-time, so will that person be taking classes during the school year in the evening time online?
For most part in our district, then we would try to support them during the summer because during the regular school year, it's pretty full with my staff. So we would try to find a way to support them in the summer.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
I'm getting anxious to get to our Thursday agenda.
Senator Coe,
Go ahead, yeah.
Committee, Superintendent John Abrams lettered me too, and I want to talk to the computer science standards just a little bit briefly. First off, elementary teachers do not have to be certified in computer science to teach computer science to their own class, which might explain why at the board hearing we had elementary teacher after elementary teacher after elementary teacher line up expressing anxiety over it because they know it's going to be put on their plate. They don't have to have 15 credits. They just have to be teaching their own students, and it's very overwhelming for them, particularly as they worry about the things that Charles just talked about. In our situation, we chose to hire a specialist, and it's now a specialist that goes from class to class and teaches every computer science to all the kids, thus taking the responsibility off the traditional elementary teacher. That was an added cost that we chose to absorb. Secondary teachers are different. They do have to be certified. They have to have those 15 credits, and I appreciate the efforts PTSB has made to be much more flexible than perhaps they have been in the past. But I have a couple of senior teachers who I'm telling you've got to go back and get certified to teach computer science, and they don't want to. They don't want to do that. They want to teach what they were hired to teach. And if they do go back, they're doing it on their own time, and in most cases, on their own dime, which creates a real challenge. Now, I applaud the computer science standards, and I heard the business testify on how we are so lacking in this area. If I get to choose between computer science and a kid being able to read, I'm taking the reading every time. Thank you.
Comments, questions? Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I have a question for you. We have so much, I already see so much consternation, and we heard it 2 years ago when we passed the computer science standards, or the bill. And I'm already hearing the consternation from all the districts across the state, and we haven't even hit, the standards haven't even been fully implemented or even passed yet. I guess I'm a little concerned that if we're already having this type of concern, outcry, are we going to see this fully implemented? Are we going to see that once we put in this in the basket of goods, that what you just said is, well, I'm going to choose to teach reading over computer science, that computer science is just not going to be taught? I guess I'd really like to know, from your professional viewpoint, if we're actually going to see these ideas that the legislature as a whole has decided is good for our kids be implemented on a whole basis.
Chairman Cole, Representative Brown, after a fashion. I'll use an example. In the basket of goods, and by the way, I have the privilege of serving on the basket of goods committee that the state board has going right now. We have things in the basket that really we need to wonder why it's in the basket. Why are we teaching foreign language K-3 and then not touching it again until secondary schools? Some important discussion needs to happen as to why that's in the basket. What we're teaching, kids can't succeed if they can't read. That always has to be the priority. And the level to which computer science standards are implemented is going to be balanced with the more important tasks of reading, writing, math. So I think it will be implemented. Some will do it better than others, but I know that every one of my peers would say we have to focus on the basics first. And we have to, being an elementary teacher is one of the most challenging jobs you could ever do. And the tears you hear and the anxiety you hear is just, I mean, when I went to that state board meeting, there was like 50 teachers lined up to say, give me a break. And we just need to be aware of that. And that's why we chose to do it the way we did it. But it was an unfunded mandate. We did that at the expense of making class sizes larger. I don't know if that answered your question, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up if I could.
Quick follow-up.
I appreciate that, but I also want to make sure that we recognize that we didn't just add this to the plate. This was not something that we added. We removed something and put this in place of. So was that explained, or is that being told in your district?
Representative Brown, tell me what you took off the plate.
I have to pull up the bill, Mr. Chairman, but we've replaced applied technology. Thank you.
Representative Brown, I'm not sure that in our district we were spending much time on applied technology. Just
Any
being
other
honest.
questions? Thank you very much. I know Boyd's going to be brief. Aren't you, Boyd?
Chairman Coe, members of the board, you know I always talk fast, so I'll do that as I testify again this time. Again, I want to thank you. I think that the Enrolled Act 55, the reading bill, is a good bill. I have supported Representative Peeperinen's bill every year about removing the foreign language at the K2 level. And one of the things that I would suggest to our legislature is to think about how we're doing some of those things. K3 is so important for our students to learn to read before they get to the end of third grade. So if we can reduce some of those things, K3, it would really be important for our staff. And it gives us that extra time for those students that need more time for reading for the big five that we talked about in the bill. Again, once they get past that third grade, we expect them to be able to read to learn. So I think that's important. You just heard two of my colleagues talk about it. So I think looking at K3 as making sure that we have kids ready to learn, that will increase our scores in a lot of different areas if we can get them there, including computer science, including social studies, science, all of those things. But I think that's where we need to make sure we specify. I want to go back to something that Representative Connolly asked me yesterday about, well, what are you going to do if you have to take care of a special ed student? Again, I think this comes back to what we just talked about with computer science. We're pushing something else out to make sure that we're getting the time that we need for computer science. And again, I would say we don't need standards K3 for computer science. We can start once they get in fourth grade and move forward. But you received a study from the Wyoming Department of Ed last year at your November JEC meeting regarding the cost of computer science, and that cost is about $12.3 million. So I think that, again, that we're looking at something that if we had some more staff that we could use to do that, we wouldn't have to push out. Now, again, some of it's time. You have to put in the time to be able to get those students to read. If they can't read, you have to have time to do the interventions. If they are reading and doing a good job, we need to do some things for enrichment. So I think making sure that we're not like the federal government and doing unfunded mandates is an important thing for us, and I'd ask you to relook at that study as we move forward. And I'm going to stop there. There's about 4 more things I was going to talk about, but I know that we're way behind.
Any comments for Senator Rothfuss?
I'll ask them offline.
Okay, thank you, Boyd. Other public testimony? Any other public testimony? Okay, public testimony is closed. Here we go on Thursday's agenda. Welcome to Thursday. Welcome back, everybody. Nice to have you.